The thunder of hoofbeats echoed through Willow Creek as Lillian Green raced across the dusty plains, her chestnut mare straining beneath her. Freedom beckoned with each passing mile, the setting sun casting long shadows across the Montana Territory. It was 1877, and at 22, Lillian was determined that no one, especially not Sheriff Wade Thornton, would decide her fate. Willow Creek had grown from a mining outpost to a respectable frontier town over the past decade. Though still rough around the edges, it boasted a general store, a modest church, and the Golden Spur Saloon where Lillian had worked as a singer for the past 8 months. Her melodious voice had brought a touch of refinement to the establishment, drawing crowds that might otherwise have bypassed the small town. The daughter of a Boston banker who had lost everything in the financial panic of '73, Lillian had made her way west after her parents' passing, seeking opportunity where few proper ladies dared venture. Her golden hair and clear blue eyes turned heads, but it was her fierce independence that kept most suitors at bay. Most, but not Sheriff Wade Thornton. Lillian slowed her horse as she approached town, composing herself. Tonight would require all her courage. The sheriff had made his intentions clear, and the whole town expected her to accept his proposal. Wade Thornton was considered a good match, a man of authority with a steady income and a solid reputation for keeping order. But Lillian knew something the townsfolk didn't. Behind his badge and respectable facade, Wade was a controlling man whose temper flared when challenged. She'd witnessed it firsthand when he'd arrested a young ranch hand for little more than bumping into him on the boardwalk. The poor boy had spent 3 days in jail for disturbing the peace. As she dismounted outside the livery stable, Lillian smoothed her riding skirt and took a deep breath. The Golden Spur would be crowded tonight. Word had spread that the sheriff planned to propose publicly a spectacle designed to make refusal impossible. Miss Green. Hank Peterson stepped from the shadows of the livery, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. I was beginning to worry. Lillian's heart quickened at the sight of him. At 26, Hank worked as a ranch hand at the Triple Diamond, having arrived in Willow Creek just 3 months prior. His weathered Stetson and worn leather vest spoke of years on the trail, but his green eyes held a gentleness that belied his rugged appearance. "Mr. Peterson," she acknowledged with a slight nod, fighting to keep her expression neutral despite the warmth spreading through her chest. "Were you waiting for me?" "Might have been," he replied, taking the reins of her horse. His calloused fingers brushed against hers, sending a jolt of awareness through her. "Word travels fast in a small town. Thought you might need a friend tonight." Lillian glanced toward the saloon where lamplight spilled onto the street. "I don't suppose you'd consider being more than a friend and helping me escape this town entirely?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Hank's expression grew serious. "You know I would, Lillian. Say the word and we could be headed to Wyoming by dawn." For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it riding away with this quiet cowboy who had stolen her heart with his gentle ways and thoughtful conversations. But running now would only confirm the gossip that already swirled around them. Sheriff Thornton would likely pursue them, claiming jurisdiction over some invented crime. "No," she said finally. "I need to face this properly. I won't be intimidated into accepting a man I don't love." Hank nodded, respect evident in his gaze. "Then I'll be there when you do." As they walked toward the Golden Spur, Lillian felt the weight of what lay ahead. The sheriff won't take kindly to rejection, especially a public one. "Let me worry about Wade Thornton," Hank said quietly. "You just speak your truth." The saloon fell silent as Lillian entered, conversations dying mid-sentence as all eyes turned toward her. She spotted Sheriff Thornton at the bar, his silver star gleaming on his chest. He straightened at her arrival, a proprietary smile spreading across his face. Lillian moved toward the small stage where she normally performed, but Wade intercepted her, taking her hand in his. "Miss Green," he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "I believe it's time we made official what everyone in town already knows." A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. Lillian's throat tightened as she tried to withdraw her hand, but the sheriff's grip remained firm. "Wade," she said quietly. "This isn't the place." "Nonsense," he interrupted, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "There's no better place than among friends." He pulled a small box from his pocket and dropped to one knee, still holding her hand captive. "Lillian Green, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The saloon grew so quiet that the ticking of the clock behind the bar sounded like thunderclaps. All eyes were on Lillian, expectation hanging heavy in the air. She felt trapped, cornered by social convention and the sheriff's authority. Then she looked past Wade to where Hank stood near the door, his steady gaze giving her courage. "I'm sorry, Sheriff Thornton," she said clearly, "but I must decline your proposal." Shock rippled through the room. Wade's face darkened as he rose slowly to his feet, the small box disappearing back into his pocket. "You're refusing me." His voice was dangerously soft. "Perhaps you misunderstand the honor being offered here." "I understand perfectly," Lillian replied, finally freeing her hand from his grip. "And my answer remains no." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Is there someone else? Some drifter who's turned your head with empty promises?" His gaze swept the room, settling momentarily on Hank before returning to Lillian. "No decent man would have you after this public embarrassment." Before Lillian could respond, Hank's voice cut through the tension. "She already belongs to me." The saloon was silent as Hank stepped forward, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to facing danger, coming to stand beside Lillian. "Is that so?" Sheriff Thornton's hand drifted toward his holster. "And when exactly did Miss Green become your property, Peterson?" "Not property," Hank corrected calmly. "But my heart is hers and hers is mine. Has been since the moment we met." Lillian stared at him in shock. They had been careful, so careful, keeping their growing affection hidden in a town where the sheriff's word was law. Yet here was Hank, publicly declaring what they had scarcely acknowledged even to each other. The sheriff's laugh held no humor. "This is who you choose over me." A saddle tramp with nothing to his name. "That's enough, Wade," interrupted Samuel Wilson, the saloon owner, stepping forward. "The lady has made her choice. Let's not spoil the evening's entertainment with hard feelings." For a moment it seemed the sheriff might draw his weapon. The tension in the room was palpable as his fingers hovered near his holster. Then he dropped his hand and smiled coldly. "Very well. The lady has made her choice." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "I wish you both every happiness." As he strode from the saloon, the silence gave way to a buzz of conversation. Lillian felt dizzy with relief and apprehension. Hank's declaration had protected her from Wade's immediate anger, but it had also dramatically changed their circumstances. "I hope I didn't speak out of turn," Hank said quietly, leading her to a quiet corner. Seemed the fastest way to end his claims. "No," Lillian replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You only spoke the truth, at least about my heart being yours." The smile that spread across his face was worth whatever trouble might come their way. "Miss Green, I believe you're expected to sing tonight, and afterward we have much to discuss." Lillian nodded, squeezing his hand briefly before making her way to the stage. As she began to sing, her voice soaring through the saloon, she felt a curious mixture of fear and elation. The confrontation with Sheriff Thornton was far from over, but for the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, she wasn't facing her battles alone. The following morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in town. Lillian had barely finished her breakfast at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house when a knock sounded at the front door. The landlady answered it, her expression souring immediately. "Sheriff Thornton to see you, Miss Green," she announced, disapproval evident in her tone. Lillian composed herself before stepping into the parlor where Wade waited, his hat in his hands and a tight smile on his face. "Good morning, Sheriff. What brings you here so early?" "I've come to apologize for any embarrassment I may have caused you last night," he said smoothly. "It was presumptuous of me to propose so publicly." Lillian remained guarded. "Apology accepted. Is there anything else? Just a friendly warning." His smile disappeared. "That cowboy of yours isn't what he appears to be. I've sent telegrams east. It seems Hank Peterson has a history he hasn't shared with you." A chill ran down Lillian's spine, but she kept her expression neutral. "We all have histories, Sheriff. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties at the church this morning." Wade placed his hat back on his head with deliberate slowness. "Consider yourself warned, Lillian. When Peterson's true nature comes to light, my offer may not still stand." After he left, Lillian sat heavily on the settee. Was Wade merely trying to sow doubt? Or did Hank truly have secrets that might change everything? She had little time to dwell on it. The church committee expected her help preparing for Sunday services, and afterward she was due at the saloon for an afternoon rehearsal. As she walked through town, she noted the curious glances and whispered conversations that followed her. Overnight, she had become the subject of Willow Creek's most interesting gossip. At the church, the minister's wife, Martha Collins, greeted her with surprising warmth. "Never you mind the talk, dear," she said, handing Lillian a vase of flowers to arrange. "Sheriff Thornton has had his eye on every unmarried woman to pass through Willow Creek these 3 years. About time someone stood up to him." "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I feared the town might take his side." "Some will," Martha admitted, "but many respect a woman who knows her own mind, and that Peterson fellow," she smiled knowingly. "He may be a working man, but there's decency in him. The way he looks at you speaks volumes." Lillian felt herself blushing. "We've been discreet." "Love rarely remains hidden in a town this size, my dear. Now, tell me about these arrangements for the service." The morning passed pleasantly enough, with Martha's acceptance easing some of Lillian's worries. But as she approached the Golden Spur for her rehearsal, she saw a small crowd gathered outside. Hank stood on the boardwalk, facing Sheriff Thornton and 2 deputies. "Hereby ordered to leave Willow Creek by sundown," Wade was saying as Lillian approached. "This is an official notice of banishment under town ordinance." "On what grounds?" Hank's voice remained level, though Lillian could see the tension in his shoulders. "Disturbing the peace, interfering with an officer in the performance of his duties, and suspicion of criminal activity." Wade smiled coldly. "The town council has authorized me to enforce this order by whatever means necessary." Lillian pushed through the onlookers. "This is absurd. Mr. Peterson has done nothing wrong." The sheriff turned to her with exaggerated patience. "Miss Green, this doesn't concern you." "Town safety is my responsibility." "Town safety or your wounded pride," she challenged. "Everyone here knows this is about last night." "I've received information suggesting Peterson is not who he claims to be," Wade countered. "Until his identity can be verified, he's considered dangerous." Samuel Wilson emerged from the saloon, frowning deeply. "Sheriff, Peterson's been working honest labor at the Triple Diamond for 3 months without incident. What evidence do you have against him?" "That's official police business," Wade replied curtly. "The order stands." Out of town by sunset, Peterson, or you'll be arrested." As the sheriff and his deputies walked away, the crowd began to disperse, many casting sympathetic glances toward Hank and Lillian. Samuel gestured them inside the saloon. "This is outrageous," Lillian said once they were seated at a corner table. "He can't just banish someone without cause." "Actually, he can," Samuel replied grimly. "Town ordinance gives the sheriff power to expel individuals deemed dangerous to public welfare. It's rarely used, but it's legal." Hank remained quiet, his expression unreadable. "Is there anything to what he's saying?" Samuel asked directly. "Anything from your past that might give him legitimate cause?" Lillian looked at Hank, realizing how little she actually knew about his life before Willow Creek. They had shared dreams and philosophies, laughed over books they'd both read, discussed their hopes for the future, but details of his past had remained vague. Hank met her gaze steadily. "Nothing that makes me a danger to this town, but I haven't always gone by Hank Peterson." Samuel cursed under his breath. "That complicates things. My real name is Henry Patterson," Hank continued. "I changed it after the war, too many memories attached to the old name, nothing criminal in that." "What about family?" Samuel pressed. "Anyone who could vouch for you?" "Parents died before the war. I have a brother somewhere in Colorado, haven't seen him in years." Hank ran a hand through his hair. "I've worked honest jobs, kept to myself, never thought I'd need character witnesses." Lillian felt a surge of determination. "Then we'll find some." "Sheriff Thornton said he sent telegrams east. We can do the same, contact your former employers, anyone who knows your character." "That takes time we don't have," Samuel pointed out. "Sunset's in 6 hours. Then we need to appeal to the town council," Lillian insisted. "Surely they won't support this if they know it's motivated by personal vendetta." Samuel looked doubtful. "Council members include Wade's uncle and 2 businessmen who depend on his goodwill. Still," he considered for a moment, "Judge Parker is due through town tomorrow on circuit. He's no friend to Wade, thinks the sheriff overreaches. If Hank could stay hidden until then." "I won't hide," Hank interrupted firmly. "Won't give Wade the satisfaction of making me run like a criminal." "Then what will you do?" Lillian asked, fear tightening around her heart. "Face him," Hank said simply. "Appeal to the townsfolk directly. Wade's power comes from their trust if enough people stand with us." Samuel nodded slowly. It could work. Wade's made enemies these past years. Not everyone appreciates his heavy-handed approach. "I'll speak to Martha Collins," Lillian suggested. "Her husband has influence with the church congregation." "And I'll talk to some of the merchants," Samuel added. "Many are tired of Wade's protection fees." As they formulated their plan, Lillian couldn't help noticing the shadows in Hank's eyes. There was something he wasn't telling them, something beyond a simple name change. When Samuel left to begin gathering support, she placed her hand over Hank's. "What aren't you saying?" He turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "There are things in my past I'm not proud of, Lillian. Not crimes, but complications that Wade could twist." "Tell me," she urged. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Hank's gaze held hers for a long moment before he nodded. "After the war I drifted, worked as a bounty hunter for a spell. Made enemies of some powerful men when I brought in their friends or family. One was a judge in Missouri who swore he'd see me ruined." "Is that why you changed your name?" "Partly," he admitted. "I never broke the law, but justice isn't always about law. If Wade contacts the wrong people, they'll paint me as a murderer rather than a man doing a legal job." Lillian absorbed this, trying to reconcile the gentle man she knew with the hardened bounty hunter he described. "Why did you stop?" "Brought in a man for robbery. Should have been a simple jail sentence, but the town decided hanging was simpler than a trial." Pain flickered across his face. He might have deserved prison, but not that. I realized I was part of a system more concerned with vengeance than justice. His honesty only strengthened Lillian's resolve. Then we'll make sure the people of Willow Creek know the real man you've become. For the next several hours, they worked separately, Lillian visiting the church and the homes of women she knew from her choir, while Hank spoke with the ranch hands and miners who frequented the saloon. By late afternoon, they had secured promises of support from a surprising number of townsfolk. As sunset approached, they gathered with Samuel and 24 supporters in front of the sheriff's office. Wade emerged, flanked by his deputies, his expression darkening at the sight of the crowd. "I see you've chosen defiance, Peterson," he said coldly. "I've chosen to defend my right to remain in a community where I've caused no harm," Hank replied. "These people agree that your order is unjust." Martha Collins stepped forward, her husband beside her. "Sheriff, we've known you since you were a boy. This vendetta is beneath you." "This isn't personal," Wade insisted. "I've received information." "What information?" challenged Reverend Collins. "In Christian charity, a man deserves to know the charges against him." Wade's jaw tightened. "Very well. Henry Patterson, yes. I know his real name. Worked as a bounty hunter after the war. He's wanted for questioning in connection with several deaths in Missouri." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hank didn't flinch. "I was a licensed bounty hunter for 3 years, he confirmed. "Every man I brought in was wanted by legitimate authorities with proper paperwork. If some died resisting capture, that was unfortunate but lawful." "The telegraph from Judge Emmett Wilson says differently," Wade countered. Hank's expression hardened. "Wilson's son was among those I captured caught rustling cattle with a gang that killed 2 ranch hands. The judge promised he'd hound me till my dying day for doing my job." "Convenient explanation," Wade sneered. Samuel Wilson stepped forward. "Wade, we've scheduled a town meeting for tomorrow when Judge Parker arrives. Let him review whatever evidence you have and make an impartial ruling." For a moment, it seemed the sheriff might relent. Then his gaze fixed on Lillian, standing defiantly beside Hank, and his expression hardened. "The banishment order stands. Peterson leaves tonight or goes to jail. Then you'll have to arrest half the town," Martha Collins declared, moving to stand with Hank and Lillian. One by one, others joined them until a solid wall of townspeople faced the sheriff. Wade's hand hovered near his gun. The moment stretched, tension crackling in the air. Then, unexpectedly, his deputy Frank Morris cleared his throat. "Sheriff, maybe we should wait for the judge. Seems the reasonable course." Wade turned in disbelief, seeing the uncertainty on his deputy's face. His authority was slipping. With visible effort, he controlled his anger. "Fine. Peterson can stay until Judge Parker's ruling. But," he added, his voice hardening, "he's confined to town limits and surrenders any weapons. One step toward leaving and it's jail until the judge arrives." It wasn't victory, but it was a reprieve. As the crowd dispersed, Lillian felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had bought time, but Wade Thornton was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. That night, unable to risk being seen together without inflaming the situation further, Lillian and Hank exchanged only brief words as she prepared for her evening performance at the saloon. The atmosphere was electric, conversations hushed as patrons discussed the day's events. When Lillian sang, she chose ballads of loyalty and perseverance. Her eyes frequently found Hank, seated quietly in the corner, and in those moments the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it united. Judge Thaddeus Parker arrived shortly before noon the next day, his stagecoach stirring dust on the main street as it rolled to a stop. A tall man with iron gray hair and piercing eyes, The circuit judge had a reputation for fairness and little patience for small-town politics. The town meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the church, the only building large enough to accommodate the surprisingly large number of citizens who wished to attend. As people filed in, Lillian was heartened to see faces from every part of Willow Creek society. Ranchers, merchants, miners, and even a delegation from the Chinese laundry. Sheriff Thornton arrived with an official-looking document, taking a seat at the front with his deputies. He barely glanced at Hank and Lillian. Judge Parker called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "I understand there's a dispute regarding the banishment of one Henry Patterson, also known as Hank Peterson. Sheriff Thornton, please present your case." Wade stood, unfolding his document with deliberate care. "Your Honor, I received this telegram 3 days ago from Judge Emmett Wilson of Clay County, Missouri. It states that Henry Patterson is wanted for questioning regarding the deaths of several men while he operated as a bounty hunter. Given this information and Patterson's deception about his identity, I deemed him a potential danger to our community." Judge Parker examined the telegram, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Patterson, what is your response to these allegations?" Hank rose, standing straight and addressing not just the judge but the entire assembly. "I worked as a licensed bounty hunter from 1868 to 1871. During that time, I tracked and apprehended individuals with legitimate bounties on their heads. Some resisted arrest violently, and in self-defense, I was forced to use deadly force." "Including Judge Wilson's son?" Parker asked directly. "Tyler Wilson was part of a gang that had murdered 2 ranch hands during a cattle theft. When I tracked them to their camp, Tyler drew on me. I had no choice but to defend myself." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Sheriff, do you have any evidence of actual criminal charges against Mr. Patterson? Not just wanted for questioning, but formal indictments." Wade shifted uncomfortably. "The telegram mentions—" "Let me see it again," Parker interrupted, extending his hand. After reviewing the document, he looked up sharply. "Sheriff, this telegram requests information about Patterson's whereabouts. It makes no mention of any formal charges or warrants." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Wade's face reddened. "Judge Wilson's reputation is not the issue here," Parker cut him off. "The issue is whether you had legal grounds to banish a citizen from this town." He turned to address the assembly. "In my experience, hasty judgments often mask personal motives. Would anyone care to provide context for this situation?" Martha Collins stood. "Your Honor, Sheriff Thornton issued this banishment order the morning after Mr. Peterson publicly declared his affection for Miss Green, the same Miss Green who had refused the sheriff's marriage proposal the previous evening." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Judge Parker raised an eyebrow. "Is this true, Sheriff?" Wade's expression was thunderous. "My personal affairs have no bearing. They have every bearing if you're using your authority to settle romantic rivalries," Parker interrupted sharply. He turned back to Hank. "Mr. Patterson, have you engaged in any illegal activity since arriving in Willow Creek?" "No, Your Honor." "Have you concealed your identity for the purpose of evading justice?" "No, sir. I changed my name to make a fresh start, but I've lived openly and honestly." Judge Parker considered for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Having reviewed the evidence, I find no legal basis for banishment. The order is hereby rescinded." He fixed Wade with a stern look. "Furthermore, Sheriff Thornton, I'm concerned about your judgment in this matter. Consider this an official warning. Use your authority in this manner again, and I'll recommend your removal to the territorial governor." Relief washed over Lillian as cheers erupted from their supporters. Hank remained composed, but the tension visibly drained from his shoulders. Wade stood rigid, humiliation and fury evident in his posture. As the crowd began to disperse, he pushed through to where Hank and Lillian stood receiving congratulations. "This isn't over, Patterson," he hissed. "Judge Parker won't always be around to protect you." Before Hank could respond, Samuel Wilson stepped between them. "It is over, Wade. You've lost this fight. Walk away before you lose more than your pride." For a moment, it seemed the sheriff might resort to violence. Then, with a last venomous glare, he stalked from the church. The victory celebration at the Golden Spur that evening was subdued but joyful. Lillian's performance drew enthusiastic applause, and Hank received numerous handshakes and backslaps from townspeople who had stood with them. "What happens now?" Lillian asked quietly when they finally had a moment alone in a corner of the saloon. "That depends," Hank replied, taking her hands in his. "Wade won't give up easily. He'll look for other ways to make our lives difficult." "We could leave," she suggested, though the thought of abandoning the life she'd built in Willow Creek pained her. "Start fresh somewhere else." Hank studied her face, his expression softening. "Is that what you want?" "I want to be where you are," she answered honestly. "But running feels like letting him win." A slow smile spread across Hank's face. "Then we stay and build something he can't tear down." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I love you, Lillian Green. Have since the first time I heard you sing. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you as your husband if you'll have me." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unexpected despite the day's tensions. "Is this a proper proposal, Mr. Peterson? Or should I call you Patterson?" "Peterson," he said firmly. "That's who I am now. And yes, this is very much a proposal." His green eyes held hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "Marry me, Lillian, not tomorrow or next week whenever you're ready, but say you will." "I will," she answered without hesitation. "I love you, Hank Peterson, and I would be honored to be your wife." The days that followed brought both joy and challenges. News of their engagement spread quickly, drawing congratulations from their supporters and cold shoulders from those allied with Sheriff Thornton. Wade himself maintained a dangerous silence, conspicuously absent from his usual rounds. "He's planning something," Samuel warned them 5 days after the judge's ruling. "Wade's pride won't let this go." "What can he do?" Lillian asked. "Judge Parker made it clear Parker's already moved on to the next town," Samuel reminded them. "And Wade has friends beyond Willow Creek. Just be careful." Their caution proved justified when Hank returned to his rented room that evening to find it ransacked, his few possessions scattered, and his savings nearly $300 carefully hidden in his boots stolen. "This is Wade's doing," Lillian fumed when Hank told her the next morning. "We should report it." "And who would we report it to?" "The sheriff." Hank shook his head. "No evidence it was him anyway. Could have been any thief." "A thief who knew exactly where to look for your money," she challenged. Hank sighed. "Let it go, Lillian. Money can be earned again. What matters is that we're together and safe." But safety proved elusive. 2 days later, Lillian received a letter from the church committee indicating that recent controversies made her continued position as choir director uncomfortable for some members. The following day, Samuel reluctantly informed her that several influential patrons had threatened to boycott the Golden Spur if she continued performing there. "It's Wade," she said bitterly. "He's trying to drive us out by cutting off our livelihoods." The pressure increased when the Triple Diamond Ranch foreman regretfully informed Hank that he could no longer employ him. "Orders from the owner," he explained awkwardly. "Says he can't afford trouble with the law." Within a week, they found themselves ostracized by half the town and struggling financially. Even their supporters seemed hesitant to be seen with them too openly, fearing similar repercussions. "Perhaps we should reconsider leaving," Lillian suggested one evening as they sat on the boardwalk outside the general store. It was one of the few businesses still welcoming them, owned by an elderly couple who had no love for Sheriff Thornton. Hank was quiet for a long moment. "There's something I haven't told you," he finally said. "Something that might change things." Lillian's heart sank. "More secrets?" "Not a secret exactly. More a plan I've been considering." He took her hand. "I have a friend from the war who settled near Bozeman. Last year he wrote offering me partnership in a horse ranch he's establishing. Said the land was rich and the territory growing fast. You never mentioned this." "Wasn't sure I wanted to leave drifting behind," he admitted. "Wasn't sure I deserved putting down roots. Then I met you, and suddenly I could imagine a future, a home, maybe children someday." Hope flickered within her. "Is the offer still open?" "Don't know, but we could find out." As they discussed the possibility, a commotion from the direction of the sheriff's office caught their attention. A group of riders was arriving, dust covered from hard travel. At their center rode a distinguished man in an expensive suit, a man whose features bore a striking resemblance to Wade Thornton. "That's Governor Thornton," murmured Mr. Elkins, the storekeeper, stepping outside to join them. "Wade's uncle. Wonder what brings him to our humble town." Lillian and Hank exchanged worried glances. The arrival of Wade's powerful relative couldn't be coincidence. Their fears were confirmed the next morning when a deputy delivered formal notices to both of them. The documents, bearing the territorial governor's seal, summoned them to a hearing at the courthouse that afternoon regarding matters of public safety and moral conduct. "This is absurd," Lillian said, pacing their small gathering of supporters at the Golden Spur. "What moral conduct could possibly concern the governor?" Martha Collins looked troubled. "There are rumors, Lillian, ugly ones, suggesting impropriety between you and Hank before your engagement." "That's ridiculous. We've been nothing but proper." "Truth matters less than perception," Samuel said grimly. "Wade's creating a scandal big enough to justify intervention." "Can he do that?" Hank asked. "Even with his uncle's help," Samuel shrugged. "Territorial law gives governors broad powers if he presents it as maintaining public order." The courthouse was packed that afternoon, curious townspeople filling every bench. Governor James Thornton sat at the judge's table, flanked by Wade and two official-looking men introduced as territorial commissioners. The proceedings began with Wade presenting his case. Willow Creek had been disrupted by moral corruption and defiance of legal authority, creating an atmosphere of lawlessness. He painted Hank as a deceptive drifter with a violent past and Lillian as a woman of questionable virtue who had enticed him away from his duties. When Hank attempted to object to these characterizations, the governor silenced him with a wave of his hand. "You'll have your chance to speak, Mr. Patterson." Witnesses were called, all allies of Wade who testified to clandestine meetings and unseemly behavior. Mrs. Henderson claimed to have heard Lillian returning to her boarding house at inappropriate hours. The Triple Diamond foreman suggested Hank had been inexplicably absent from his bunk on multiple occasions. By the time Lillian and Hank were allowed to speak in their defense, the atmosphere in the courtroom had turned decidedly hostile. Their own witnesses, including Martha Collins and Samuel Wilson, were barely given time to testify before being dismissed as biased. The governor's conclusion seemed predetermined. "Having reviewed the evidence, it is the finding of this hearing that Henry Patterson poses a continued threat to the peace and moral fabric of Willow Creek. He is hereby ordered to depart the territory within 48 hours." Lillian gasped. "And what about me?" Governor Thornton regarded her with cold disapproval. "Miss Green, while your behavior has been concerning, You have established roots in this community. You may remain, provided you conduct yourself with appropriate decorum in the future." The implication was clear. Separate from Hank or face similar banishment as they left the courthouse, stunned by the injustice, Wade intercepted them on the steps. "A word in private, Miss Green. Anything you have to say can be said in front of Hank," she replied coldly. Wade smiled thinly. "Very well. The governor's ruling can be amended. Renounce this engagement, return to your proper place in society, and Peterson might find the territory suddenly more welcoming to his presence." "You mean if I agree to marry you instead?" Lillian said flatly. "That opportunity has passed," Wade replied, "but a public statement acknowledging your error in judgment would satisfy propriety." Hank's hand tightened around hers. "Lillian owes you no explanations or apologies." "Then prepare for a long separation," Wade said coldly. "The governor has authorized me to enforce his ruling by whatever means necessary." He touched the brim of his hat in mocking courtesy and descended the steps. Their supporters gathered at Samuel's office behind the saloon, the mood somber as they considered options. "The ruling is a farce," Martha Collins declared angrily, "based on lies and innuendo." "But legally enforceable," Samuel reminded her, "until it's appealed to higher authorities." "That could take months," Hank said, "and I have 48 hours. Lillian had been silent, her mind racing through possibilities. Now she looked up, determination replacing despair. "Then we leave together." "Tonight." "Lillian, no," Martha protested. "You've built a life here." "A life that's being systematically destroyed," she countered. "Even if I stayed, Wade would make existence unbearable unless I capitulated." "If we go, we're confirming their lies," Hank said quietly, "making ourselves fugitives. If we stay, we're separated indefinitely." Lillian's voice softened. "I choose you, Hank, whatever comes with that choice." The decision made, their friends quickly organized assistance. Samuel offered his private wagon and team. Martha gathered provisions. Mr. Elkins promised to distract the deputy watching Hank's boarding house. "Head north," advised James Tucker, a former cavalry scout who frequented the saloon. "Bozeman's growing fast. Easy to disappear there." As midnight approached, Lillian waited anxiously in the shadows behind the livery stable, a small trunk containing her most essential possessions at her feet. The plan was simple. Samuel would bring the wagon, they would collect Hank and slip out of town using the old mining road that skirted the main trail. The minutes stretched interminably. Had something gone wrong? Had Wade somehow discovered their plan? Finally, hoofbeats approached. But instead of Samuel's wagon, it was Hank on horseback, leading a second mount. His expression was grim. "Change of plans," he said quickly, dismounting to help her onto the spare horse. "Wade's deputies are watching the roads. Samuel thinks someone warned them. How will we get out?" Lillian asked, securing her trunk to the saddle. "There's a trail through Jackson's Gorge. It's rough going, but the deputies won't expect us that way." As they rode into the moonlit night, Lillian felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. Everything she had known, stability, community, respectability, lay behind her. Ahead was uncertainty, hardship, even danger. Yet beside her rode the man she loved, and somehow that made the future seem full of promise rather than peril. They pushed hard through the night, following game trails and dried creek beds to avoid the main roads. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles. The lights of Willow Creek long vanished behind the rolling hills. "We should rest the horses," Hank said as they reached a small stream. "And ourselves." They dismounted in a sheltered hollow, the early morning light filtering through cottonwood trees. Lillian was exhausted, muscles aching from hours in the saddle, but she felt strangely peaceful. "No regrets?" Hank asked, helping her spread a blanket on the soft grass. "None," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "This isn't how I imagined beginning our life together, but I wouldn't change my choice." He smiled, that gentle expression that had first captured her heart. "When we reach Bozeman, the first thing I'll do is find a preacher. Make this proper." "It already is proper," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "In all the ways that matter." Their respite was brief. By mid-morning they were riding again, pushing northwest toward the Montana border. They avoided settlements, purchasing supplies from isolated homesteads, where news traveled slowly and questions were few. On the third day, they spotted riders on their back trail, 3 men moving with purpose, their horses eating up the distance between them. "Wade's men?" Lillian asked, fear tightening her chest. Hank nodded grimly. "Likely. We need to find cover." They veered toward a ridge of rocky outcroppings, hoping to lose their pursuers in the labyrinth of stone. For hours they threaded through narrow passages, doubling back and crossing their trail to confuse anyone following. As dusk approached, they found a defensible position, a small cave with water seeping from the rock wall and a clear view of the approach. "We'll stay here tonight," Hank decided. Too dangerous to move in the dark through this terrain. They ate a cold supper, not daring to light a fire that might reveal their position. As night fell, Hank took first watch while Lillian tried to rest. Sleep proved elusive. Every sound, the whisper of wind through the rocks, the distant call of a coyote sent her heart racing. What if Wade's men found them? What if Hank was arrested, or worse? "You should be sleeping," Hank said softly, noticing her open eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "I keep thinking about Wade," she admitted. "How far will he go to punish us?" Hank was silent for a long moment. "Wade Thornton is a man who believes his authority gives him ownership of the town, of justice, of you. Men like that are dangerous when challenged." "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Not for myself, but for you, if they catch us." "They won't," he promised, though they both knew it wasn't a guarantee he could make. "And if they do, we'll face it together." Morning revealed no sign of their pursuers. Cautiously optimistic, they continued their journey, staying off established trails and crossing rivers to break their scent. By the 7th day, they had reached the outskirts of Bozeman. The town was larger than Willow Creek, bustling with the energy of a growing frontier settlement. Here, they hoped, they might blend in among other newcomers seeking fresh starts. Hank's friend, Thomas Caldwell, owned a sprawling property 10 miles outside town. They approached cautiously, uncertain of their welcome after so much time. The ranch house came into view as they crested a hill, a solid 2-story structure surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. A man was working with a spirited black horse in the nearest paddock, his back to them as they approached. "Thomas," Hank called when they were within earshot. The man turned, his weathered face breaking into a wide grin. "Henry Patterson. By God, I was beginning to think you'd never take me up on my offer." His gaze shifted to Lillian, curiosity evident. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Thomas Caldwell. Meet Lillian Green, soon to be Lillian Peterson." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "Peterson? Long story," Hank said with a faint smile. "We've had a complicated journey." "Well, any journey that ends with a beautiful fiancé can't be all bad," Thomas replied, extending his hand to Lillian. "Welcome to Whispering Pines Ranch, Miss Green." The warmth of their reception eased some of the tension Lillian had carried since leaving Willow Creek. Thomas's wife, Alina, insisted they stay in the main house until they could establish their own place. Within days, Hank was working alongside Thomas, his natural affinity for horses quickly proving his value as a partner. For Lillian, adjustment came more slowly. After years of independence, Being a guest in another's home, even one as welcoming as the Caldwells, felt constraining. She missed her music, the satisfaction of earning her own way. "You seem restless," Alina observed one afternoon as they preserved fruit from the orchard. "Finding it hard to settle," Lillian sighed. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been there." Alina's smile was understanding. "I came west as a schoolteacher. Marrying Thomas meant giving up that role. Took time to find new purpose." "I love Hank," Lillian said quickly. "I don't regret choosing him. Of course not. But loving a man doesn't mean surrendering everything you are." Alina wiped her hands on her apron. "Bozeman's growing. The new hotel is looking for entertainment. Someone with your talents could find opportunity there." Hope stirred within Lillian. "Do you really think so?" "I know so. Thomas and I dined there last month. The piano player was adequate, but they had no proper singer." Alina smiled encouragingly. "We could ride into town tomorrow, make inquiries." The proprietor of the Grand Hotel received Lillian with interest, especially after Alina mentioned her experience entertaining at the Golden Spur. An audition was arranged for the following week, and Lillian threw herself into preparation, practicing her repertoire daily. The evening of her audition, Hank accompanied her to town, pride evident in every glance he cast her way. The hotel's dining room was elegant by frontier standards: crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, and a small stage where a piano waited. Lillian performed 3 songs, her clear voice filling the room with emotion and power. When she finished, the smattering of diners applauded enthusiastically, and the proprietor offered her a position on the spot 3 evenings a week, with pay comparable to what she had earned in Willow Creek. "You were magnificent," Hank said as they rode home beneath a canopy of stars. "Like you belong on that stage." "It felt right," she admitted. "Like finding a piece of myself I'd been missing." He reached across to take her hand. "I want you to have that, to be fully yourself, not just Henry Patterson's wife." "Speaking of which," she said, squeezing his hand, "when do I officially become Mrs. Peterson? We've been here almost 3 weeks, and that preacher you promised is still nowhere to be seen." Hank laughed. "Patience, Miss Green. I've been saving for something special." At her questioning look, he added mysteriously, "You'll see soon enough." True to his word, the following Sunday Hank surprised her with a trip to town. Instead of heading to the church, however, he directed their buggy to a small house on a quiet street near the edge of Bozeman. "Whose home is this?" Lillian asked, confused. "Ours," Hank replied, his expression a mixture of nervousness and pride. "If you like it." Stunned, Lillian allowed him to help her from the buggy. The house was modest but charming: a covered porch, flower boxes beneath the windows, fresh paint gleaming in the sunshine. "Thomas helped me arrange it," Hank explained as he unlocked the door. "It's not grand, but it's close enough to town for your work at the hotel, and there's good grazing land out back for horses." Inside was simply furnished but comfortable, with a parlor, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating wooden floors that had been recently polished. "How can we afford this?" Lillian asked, still trying to absorb the surprise. "I've been saving longer than you know," Hank admitted. "Was never much for spending when I was drifting. Thomas is making me partner in the ranch with a share of profits. Between that and your singing, we'll manage." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "It's perfect, Hank. Absolutely perfect." His expression softened with relief. "There's one more surprise." He led her back outside where a small group had gathered: Thomas and Alina, the local minister and his wife, and several neighbors Hank had befriended at the ranch. "Thought we might have a wedding," he said softly. "Right here in front of our new home, unless you wanted something grander." "This is exactly what I want," Lillian replied, her heart overflowing. To begin our life together surrounded by new friends in the home you've provided. The ceremony was simple, but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows on the front porch, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Hank kissed her with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. The small reception that followed was joyful, with Alina contributing a wedding cake and Thomas providing champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. As twilight descended, their guests departed with well wishes, leaving the newlyweds alone in their new home. "Happy, Mrs. Peterson?" Hank asked as they stood on the porch, watching the first stars appear. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "I only wish—" "What?" he prompted gently when she hesitated. "That we didn't have to look over our shoulders. That Wade Thornton wasn't still out there nursing his grudge." Hank's arms tightened around her. "We're 100 miles from Willow Creek with new names and new lives. Even Wade's reach has limits." She nodded, trying to believe it. "You're right. This is our fresh start." The following weeks settled into a pleasant rhythm. 3 evenings a week, Lillian performed at the Grand Hotel, her popularity growing steadily. During days, she made their house a home, planting a small garden and becoming acquainted with neighbors. Hank divided his time between the ranch partnership and training horses from their own small herd, his expertise drawing clients from surrounding settlements. Their happiness seemed complete when, 2 months after their wedding, Lillian discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and a renewed sense of purpose to their home. "A baby," Hank said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" she asked, watching his face. "Beyond words," he replied, emotion making his voice rough. "I never thought I'd have this a home, a wife, a child on the way. You've given me more than I dreamed possible." As her pregnancy progressed, Lillian continued singing at the hotel, though she reduced her schedule to 2 evenings a week. The proprietor, delighted by her popularity, was accommodating, especially after she promised to return full-time after the baby's arrival. Winter arrived with heavy snows that isolated their homestead for days at a time. They embraced the cozy intimacy, reading aloud by firelight and planning for the child who would join them in spring. Hank built a cradle from pine harvested on the ranch, while Lillian sewed tiny garments from soft flannel. Their peaceful existence was shattered one blustery February evening when a knock sounded at their door. Hank answered, admitting a snow-covered Thomas Caldwell whose grim expression immediately set alarm bells ringing. "What's wrong?" Hank asked, helping his friend remove his ice-crusted coat. Thomas glanced at Lillian, hesitation evident in his manner. "Perhaps we should speak privately." "Whatever it is concerns both of us," Lillian said firmly, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Thomas sighed. "Very well. A man's been asking questions in town about newcomers who arrived last summer, described a couple matching your description." Icy fear trickled down Lillian's spine. "Wade, not personally," Thomas replied. "A hired man by the sound of it, professional type." "Bounty hunter," Hank said grimly. "Wade's using my old profession against me." "What did this man want?" Lillian asked. "Information on your whereabouts. Claimed there was a reward for information leading to Henry Patterson's arrest." "Arrest for what?" Hank demanded. "There are no legitimate charges against me." "He mentioned something about violating a territorial banishment order," Thomas said. "And—" he hesitated, looking apologetically at Lillian, "abduction of a woman against her will." "That's absurd," Lillian exclaimed. "I left Willow Creek voluntarily." "Wade's twisting the narrative," Hank said quietly, "making me the villain who stole away the town's beloved singer." He turned to Thomas. "Did anyone talk to this hunter? Not that I know of. Bozeman's grown enough that newcomers don't draw much attention. And you've been going by Peterson consistently." Thomas looked troubled. "But he's persistent. Been in town 3 days, asking at every business." "It's only a matter of time before someone makes the connection," Lillian said, fear making her voice tight. Hank paced the small parlor, his expression darkening. "We could run again, find somewhere more remote." "With a baby coming in less than 2 months, Lillian shook her head. "Besides, how long do we keep running? Until our child is grown, until Wade Thornton dies of old age." "She's right," Thomas said quietly. "Running just confirms guilt in people's minds." Hank's jaw tightened. "What do you suggest?" "Face it head on. You have standing here now, friends, reputation, roots in the community. If accusations come, fight them legally." After Thomas left, Hank and Lillian sat long into the night, weighing options. The bounty hunter might give up after finding no easy leads. He might never connect Hank Peterson, respected horse trainer, with Henry Patterson, alleged fugitive. But the risk remained, hovering over their hard-won happiness like a storm cloud. "I won't let him take this from us," Hank vowed, his hand covering Lillian's where it rested on her belly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The bounty hunter departed Bozeman after a week of fruitless inquiries, but his presence left a shadow over their contentment. Hank took to carrying a pistol again, something he hadn't done since leaving Willow Creek. Lillian found herself studying strangers' faces whenever she performed at the hotel, watching for signs of recognition or threat. Despite their vigilance, they were unprepared when trouble finally arrived, not from Wade's hired man, but from Wade himself. Lillian was at home, her performance at the hotel canceled due to a spring blizzard that had swept through the region. Hank had gone to the ranch to check on a mare about to foal, promising to return before dark. As afternoon faded toward evening, Lillian heard a horse approaching through the swirling snow. Relief flooded her. Hank was home safe. She opened the door with a welcoming smile that froze on her face when she recognized the rider dismounting at her gate. Sheriff Wade Thornton looked much as he had in Willow Creek, though his face was reddened from the cold and his expression harder than she remembered. He approached the porch with deliberate slowness, one hand resting near his holster. "Miss Green," he said, as though the past 8 months had never happened. "Or should I say Mrs. Patterson now?" Lillian's hand instinctively moved to protect her belly. "What do you want, Wade?" "Justice," he replied simply. "Your husband violated a legal banishment order. He's wanted back in Montana territory." "This is Montana territory," she pointed out, fighting to keep her voice steady. "And his name is Peterson now." Wade's smile was cold. "A man can't escape justice by changing his name. Where is he?" "Not here," she replied, grateful that was the truth. "And you're not welcome on our property. Please leave." He studied her silently, his gaze lingering on her advanced pregnancy. Something flickered in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or bitter acknowledgement of what might have been. "I'll find him," Wade said finally. "Better for everyone if you convince him to surrender peacefully when he returns." "There's nothing peaceful about your vendetta," Lillian replied, anger overcoming fear. "This was never about justice. It was about your wounded pride." Wade's expression hardened. "Be careful, Lillian. Your condition won't protect you from charges of aiding a fugitive." As he turned to leave, Lillian called after him. "Why can't you just let us be? We're hundreds of miles from Willow Creek, building a new life that has nothing to do with you." He paused, looking back at her with an unreadable expression. "Because some things can't go unpunished. He took what was meant to be mine." After he rode away, Lillian closed and barred the door with shaking hands. How had Wade found them? How much time did they have before he returned? possibly with legal authority to arrest Hank. She moved quickly, packing essentials into a carpetbag, warm clothing, money they had saved, documents proving ownership of their home and Hank's partnership in the ranch. If they needed to flee, they would be prepared. When Hank returned an hour later, she met him at the door, words tumbling out in a rush of fear and urgency. His expression grew grimmer with each detail of Wade's visit. "He's alone," Hank confirmed, checking the pistol at his hip. "For now," Lillian replied, "but he'll be back, probably with official support." Hank moved to the window, scanning the snowy landscape. "We need to warn Thomas. If Wade knows we're in Bozeman, he might go to the ranch looking for me." "We can't go out in this storm," Lillian protested, gesturing to her belly. "And you can't leave me alone, not with Wade nearby." The conflict in Hank's eyes was painful to witness. "You're right. We'll wait until morning, see if the storm breaks." He moved to the fireplace, adding logs to build up the heat. "Try to rest. I'll keep watch." Sleep was impossible. Lillian dozed fitfully in their bed while Hank maintained vigil by the window. Every creak of the house in the wind, every shadow moving across the snow-reflected light sent adrenaline coursing through her veins. Near dawn, she was awakened by a sharp pain lancing across her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the bedsheets as the sensation intensified, then gradually eased. "Hank," she called, her voice tight with fear. "Something's wrong." He was at her side instantly, face pale with concern. "The baby." Another contraction gripped her, stronger than the first. "It's too early," she whispered when she could speak again. "Almost 6 weeks too early." Hank's expression shifted from concern to determination. "We need the doctor. I'll go into town." "No." Terror seized her at the thought of being left alone. "Wade is out there somewhere, and the roads will be impassable after the storm." As if to confirm her words, another contraction came, closer to the previous one than it should have been. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the room's chill. "The baby's coming now," she said with certainty. "We can't wait." For a moment, panic flashed across Hank's face. Then he nodded, squeezing her hand. "I delivered foals and calves on the trail. Different, but we'll manage. I'll heat water, find clean linens." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Lillian drew on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, following Hank's calm instructions and fighting through contractions that came with increasing frequency and intensity. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, pale morning light filtering through the windows. Inside, their focus narrowed to the ancient primal process of bringing new life into the world. "I can see the head," Hank said finally, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You're doing wonderfully, Lillian, just a little more." With a final, tremendous effort, Lillian pushed, and their daughter slipped into the world in her father's waiting hands. For one terrifying moment, there was silence. Then a thin cry filled the room, small but determined, a declaration of presence. "She's here," Hank said, his voice breaking as he placed the tiny, red-faced infant on Lillian's chest. "Our daughter's here." Exhausted but overjoyed, Lillian cradled their child, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of miniature features. Despite her early arrival, the baby seemed strong, her cries vigorous, her grip surprisingly firm when she clasped Lillian's finger. "She's beautiful," Hank whispered, sitting beside them on the bed, one arm around Lillian's shoulders. "Perfect." For a few precious hours, they existed in a bubble of wonder and gratitude, the outside world with its threats and complications temporarily forgotten. They named their daughter Hope, both for the feeling she inspired and for the future they envisioned for her. Reality intruded with a pounding on their door shortly after midday. Hank tensed, reaching for his pistol. "Stay with Hope," he instructed, moving cautiously toward the entrance. "Who's there?" he called through the wood. "Thomas Caldwell," came the reply. "And Alina." "Let us in. Hank, it's urgent." Relief flooded through him as he unbarred the door. The Caldwells entered, stamping snow from their boots, their expressions shifting from urgency to surprise as they took in the scene. Lillian propped up in bed with a newborn at her breast. "My God," Thomas exclaimed. "The baby, born this morning," Hank confirmed with pride. "Meet our daughter, Hope Peterson." Alina immediately went to Lillian's side, her practiced eye assessing mother and child. "She's early but looks healthy. How are you feeling?" "Exhausted but happy," Lillian replied. "What brings you here in such weather?" Thomas exchanged a grim look with Hank. "Sheriff Thornton. He came to the ranch last night looking for you. When we denied knowing your whereabouts, he threatened to return with a search warrant." "Did he leave Bozeman?" Hank asked urgently. "No. He's at the hotel, meeting with the county sheriff. Word is they're organizing a search party." Thomas's expression was troubled. "Hank, he's got papers, official-looking documents authorizing your arrest for violating territorial orders and abducting Lillian." "That's absurd," Alina interjected. "Anyone who's seen you together knows she's here by choice." "Wade doesn't care about truth," Lillian said wearily. "Only about winning." Hank paced the small room, conflict evident in every line of his body. "We can't run, not with Lillian just delivered and a newborn, but if I stay—" "There might be another way," Thomas said slowly. "Judge Parker is in Helena. Alina has a cousin in his office. If we could get word to him about the situation, explain the circumstances." "That would take days," Hank objected. "Wade will be here within hours." "Not if he can't find you," Thomas countered. "The storm has made travel difficult. Most people are staying close to home. If you went aground somewhere unexpected—" A plan quickly formed. The Caldwells would take Lillian and baby Hope to their ranch, where Alina's nursing experience would ensure proper care. Meanwhile, Hank would hide at the home of Thomas's foreman, the last place Wade would think to look. Thomas himself would ride for Helena to contact Judge Parker. "It's temporary," Thomas assured them. "Just until we can get legal intervention." Tears filled Lillian's eyes at the thought of separation so soon after Hope's birth, but she recognized the necessity. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said to Hank as he helped her prepare for travel. "No heroics. Wade is dangerous, especially now that he's been thwarted again." "I promise," he replied, kissing her tenderly. "This will end soon, one way or another." The parting was brief but emotionally wrenching. Hank held his newborn daughter, memorizing her tiny features before handing her to Alina's experienced arms. Then he embraced Lillian, pouring a lifetime of love into one kiss. "I'll come for you as soon as it's safe," he vowed. "We'll be waiting," she replied, forcing strength into her voice despite her exhaustion. As they went their separate ways, Lillian and Hope in the Caldwells' covered wagon, Hank on horseback toward the foreman's cabin, and Thomas setting out for Helena, none of them noticed the figure watching from the cover of pine trees at the edge of their property. Wade Thornton observed the departures with cold calculation, noting which direction each party took. After a moment's consideration, he turned his horse toward town. The woman and child were headed to the Caldwell ranch. They could wait. It was Henry Patterson he wanted most. At the county sheriff's office, Wade presented his documentation with authoritative confidence. "The fugitive is hiding at a cabin belonging to the Caldwell ranch foreman," he explained. "We should move quickly before he's warned of our approach." The county sheriff, a cautious man named Davis, reviewed the papers with a frown. "These seem in order, but I'm not familiar with this case. Patterson, or Peterson as he's known here, has been a law-abiding citizen since arriving in Bozeman. Criminals often appear respectable until apprehended," Wade replied smoothly. The territorial governor himself signed the banishment order Patterson violated. Surely you don't question his authority. No, but then gather your deputies, Wade interrupted. I'd prefer to make this arrest without bloodshed, which means sufficient manpower to discourage resistance. Reluctantly, Sheriff Davis summoned 2 deputies. As they prepared to ride out, he pulled Wade aside. We do this by the book, Thornton. No excessive force. Patterson comes in alive and unharmed to face proper judicial proceedings. Wade's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, justice is all I seek. The foreman's cabin was isolated, situated in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. As the lawman approached, there was no sign of movement within, though smoke curled from the chimney indicating recent occupation. Patterson, Sheriff Davis called out, "This is the county sheriff. Come out peacefully. We have a warrant for your arrest." Silence answered him. The 4 men exchanged glances, tension mounting. "Could be asleep," one deputy suggested. "Or didn't hear us in this wind." "Or he's preparing ambush," Wade countered, drawing his pistol. "He's a dangerous man with military experience." Sheriff Davis frowned at Wade's weapon. "Holster that until we determine the situation." To the cabin he called again. "Henry Patterson, this is your final warning. Come out with your hands visible." When silence again greeted them, Davis signaled his deputies to approach the cabin from different angles while he moved toward the front door. Wade positioned himself with a clear view of both the cabin's entrance and its single window. The sheriff tried the door and found it unlocked. Cautiously, he pushed it open, revealing a small, sparsely furnished interior. A fire burned low in the hearth, a pot of coffee warming beside it. But of Hank Peterson there was no sign. "He's gone," Davis announced, lowering his weapon as he completed his search of the one-room structure. "Recently, judging by the fire, but gone." Wade cursed under his breath. He must have been warned. The Caldwells, a distant gunshot interrupted him, followed by a second report echoing through the trees. The lawmen exchanged alarmed glances. "Came from the direction of the main ranch house," one deputy said. "Lillian," Wade muttered, an unfamiliar emotion flickering across his face. Was it concern? Fear? Whatever motivated him, he was first to mount his horse, spurring it toward the sound without waiting for the others. The scene at the Caldwell ranch was chaotic. Alina stood on the porch, a rifle in her hands, while 2 rough-looking men took cover behind a water trough. In the doorway behind her, Lillian could be seen clutching baby Hope, her face pale with fear. "Put down your weapons." Wade shouted as he dismounted, his badge visible. "Sheriff's office." The men glanced at each other, clearly debating whether to comply. One raised his hand slowly, but the other made a sudden movement toward his holster. Wade's reaction was instantaneous. His pistol barked once, the shot striking the second man in the shoulder. He cried out, his own weapon dropping unfired to the ground. "The next one goes through your head," Wade advised coldly. "Both of you face down, hands behind your backs." As the county sheriff and his deputies secured the wounded man and his companion, Wade approached Alina, his expression uncharacteristically concerned. "Are you hurt? He hesitated. "Is Lillian safe?" Alina lowered her rifle cautiously. "We're unharmed, no thanks to these men." They claimed to be looking for Henry Patterson, but they were really after robbery. Started demanding valuables when I said he wasn't here. Wade's gaze moved past Alina to where Lillian stood in the doorway, the newborn clutched protectively to her chest. For a long moment, their eyes met across the yard, former suitor and the woman who had rejected him, now a mother with a child that could have been his. Something shifted in Wade's expression. Without another word to Alina, he walked toward the house, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "You've had the baby," he said, stating the obvious. Lillian nodded, too exhausted for hostility. "This morning. Her name is Hope." Wade seemed at a loss for words, an unusual state for the normally authoritative sheriff. Finally, he asked, "She's healthy, despite being early?" "Yes," Lillian replied, surprised by his apparent concern. "Small but strong," he nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Good, that's good." After another awkward silence, he added, "Those men, they weren't with me, I want you to know that." "Then who were they?" Wade glanced back at the prisoners being loaded onto horses by the deputies. "Local troublemakers, most likely. News travels. They probably heard about the reward I've been offering for information on Patterson's whereabouts and decided to collect it by force." "A reward you offered as part of a personal vendetta," Lillian said, finding her voice again. "All this the danger to my child, my separation from my husband because you couldn't accept rejection." For the first time since she'd known him, Wade Thornton appeared genuinely ashamed. "It wasn't just rejection," he said quietly. "It was humiliation, in front of the entire town. My town. So you pursued us across territories, fabricated charges, separated a family on the day of a child's birth, all to salve your wounded pride." Her voice trembled with suppressed fury. Before Wade could answer, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Thomas Caldwell rode into the yard, accompanied by another horseman, tall, distinguished, with iron-gray hair and a bearing that commanded respect. "Judge Parker," Eleanor said with evident relief. The circuit judge dismounted, surveying the scene with sharp eyes. "Sheriff Thornton," he greeted Wade formally, "it seems I've arrived at an opportune moment." "Your Honor," Wade replied stiffly, "I'm here on official business with the county sheriff." "We have a warrant for Henry Patterson's arrest." Judge Parker extended his hand. "May I see this warrant?" As Wade produced the document, another rider appeared, Hank, his expression shifting from alarm to confusion as he took in the tableau before him. His wife and child safe on the porch, Wade and Judge Parker in seemingly civil conversation, two prisoners being guarded by deputies. "Hank," Lillian called, relief flooding her voice. He dismounted and moved toward the house, wary eyes on Wade, who had turned at Lillian's call. For a tense moment, it seemed the sheriff might draw his weapon. Then Judge Parker's authoritative voice broke the tension. "This warrant," he said, holding up Wade's document, "appears to be based on a territorial banishment order that exceeds proper jurisdiction. Sheriff Thornton, did you pursue the Petersons across territorial lines without following proper extradition procedures?" Wade's silence was answer enough. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the charge of abduction is contradicted by Mrs. Peterson's obvious voluntary association with her husband." He gestured toward Lillian, still standing protectively with her child. "I'd say this constitutes harassment, not legitimate law enforcement." "The governor signed," Wade began. "Based on information you provided," Judge Parker interrupted. "Information I suspect was incomplete and potentially misleading." He folded the warrant deliberately. "Consider this nullified. Any further pursuit of Mr. and Mrs. Peterson will be considered abuse of authority and grounds for removal of your badge." The fight seemed to drain from Wade Thornton. He looked from the judge to Hank, then finally to Lillian and the infant in her arms. "Congratulations on your daughter," he said quietly. Then to Hank, "Take care of them." With that, he turned and walked to his horse. The county sheriff approached Judge Parker, clearly relieved by his intervention. "What about these two?" he asked, gesturing to the prisoners. "Attempted robbery is a clear charge." "Take them back to Bozeman for trial," Parker advised. "I'll be along shortly to formalize the paperwork." As Wade and the county lawmen departed with their prisoners, Hank rushed up the steps to enfold Lillian and Hope in a gentle embrace. "Are you all right, both of you?" "We are now," she replied, tears of relief streaming down her face. "It's over, Hank, really over." Judge Parker approached, smiling at the family reunion. "Mr. Peterson or Patterson, if you prefer, you're a fortunate man. Not many would inspire such loyalty from friends and such devotion from a wife." "I know it, Your Honor," Hank replied sincerely, "and it's Peterson now. Henry Patterson was a name for a solitary man. Hank Peterson has a family, a home, a future." "Well said," the judge approved. "Now, if you don't mind, I believe introductions are in order. This little one and I haven't been properly introduced." Lillian smiled, adjusting the blanket to reveal their daughter's sleeping face. "Your Honor, meet Hope Peterson. Born this morning in the midst of a storm, but already bringing sunshine to our lives." Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer fair in Bozeman had grown significantly since its humble beginnings, now drawing participants from across Montana territory. Whispering Pines Ranch had a prominent display of horses for sale, its reputation for quality stock having spread far beyond county lines. Hank Peterson stood proudly beside their prize stallion, answering questions from potential buyers. At 31, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place in the world. The past 5 years had brought prosperity to their partnership with the Caldwells, allowing Hank and Lillian to expand their own holdings and build a larger home for their growing family. "Papa, Papa!" A little girl with golden curls and her father's green eyes came running through the fairgrounds, her mother following at a more sedate pace, one hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. Hank swept Hope into his arms, swinging her high. "There's my girl. Are you enjoying the fair?" "We saw the pie contest and the quilts and a man who juggles fire," Hope reported breathlessly. "And Mama let me ride the pony twice. Quite an adventure," Hank agreed, setting her down to greet Lillian with a gentle kiss. "How are you feeling? Should you be walking so much?" Lillian smiled, radiant at 27 and expecting their second child in 3 months. "I'm perfectly fine. The doctor said exercise is good, remember? Besides, Hope's enthusiasm is infectious." Indeed, their daughter was already examining the stallion with the serious expression she reserved for all animals, her natural affinity for horses evident even at her young age. "Mr. Peterson." A fair official approached, looking harried. "You're needed at the judging tent. There's a dispute about the 3-year-old mare category." Hank sighed. "Duty calls. Can you manage here?" "Of course," Lillian assured him. "Hope and I will watch the booth. Won't we, sweetheart?" The little girl nodded solemnly, clearly taking the responsibility seriously. Hank departed with the official, leaving his family to tend their display. Business was steady throughout the afternoon. Lillian, whose musical performances at the Grand Hotel had made her something of a local celebrity, found herself greeting many familiar faces. Hope charmed potential customers with her earnest descriptions of the horse's qualities, clearly her father's daughter in her knowledge of horseflesh. As the day began to cool toward evening, Lillian guided Hope to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree, grateful for the chance to rest her swollen ankles. The little girl leaned against her side, suddenly subdued after the excitement of the day. "Tired, sweetheart?" Lillian asked, stroking her daughter's curls. Hope nodded. "Mama, that man is staring at us." Lillian followed her daughter's gaze to a figure standing at the edge of the fairgrounds, a man in worn trail clothes, his face partially shadowed by his hat brim. Something about his posture seemed familiar, sending a chill of recognition through her. "Stay here," she instructed Hope firmly. "Don't move until I come back." Heart pounding, Lillian walked toward the man, one protective hand on her belly. As she approached, he removed his hat, confirming her suspicion. "Wade," she acknowledged, stopping several feet away. "Lillian," he replied, his voice rougher than she remembered. The years had not been kind to Wade Thornton. Deep lines etched his face and gray streaked his once dark hair. He no longer wore a badge. "What are you doing in Bozeman?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Passing through, heading to Oregon Territory." He gestured vaguely westward. "Lost my position in Willow Creek 2 years back. Been drifting since." She wasn't surprised. Judge Parker had warned Wade about abuse of authority, and the former sheriff had never been one to moderate his approach. "I saw your name on the ranch display," he continued. I don't know. See how things turned out for you." "We're doing well," she replied simply. "Very well." Wade's gaze drifted to where Hope sat watching them intently. "Your girl, she has your hair." "Yes, Hope, she's 5. Lillian rested her hand more prominently on her belly. "We're expecting another in October." A complex emotion flickered across Wade's face, regret, perhaps, for what might have been had he been a different sort of man. "You got the life you wanted." "Yes," she said softly. "I did." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with that simple truth. "Good, that's as it should be." He replaced his hat, touching the brim in a gesture that recalled his days as sheriff. "Be happy, Lillian." "Wade," she called as he turned to go, "I hope you find peace." A sad smile touched his lips. "Doubt that's in the cards for me, but I appreciate the sentiment." As he walked away, Lillian felt the weight of old fears lifting. Wade Thornton was no longer the powerful, vindictive man who had pursued them across territories. He was simply a drifter, nursing regrets for a life that had slipped through his fingers. She returned to Hope, who was watching with curious eyes. "Who was that man, Mama?" "Someone I knew long ago," Lillian replied, smoothing her daughter's curls. "From before you were born." "Was he a friend?" Lillian considered how to answer. "No, not exactly, but he's not an enemy anymore either." Hope accepted this with a child's practicality, already distracted by the sight of her father returning from the judging tent. "Everything resolved?" Lillian asked as Hank joined them, immediately lifting Hope onto his shoulders. "Eventually. Reminded me why I prefer horses to committees." He noticed her thoughtful expression. "Something wrong?" She shook her head, taking his free hand. "Just thinking about how fortunate we are, how different things might have been." "Having regrets?" he asked, a hint of worry in his voice. "Not a single one," she assured him, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Every choice, every struggle led us here. I wouldn't change a moment." As they walked together through the fairgrounds, their daughter chattering happily above them and their second child growing beneath her heart, Lillian marveled at the journey that had brought them to this place. From a defiant moment in a frontier saloon to a life rich with love and purpose, they had built something Wade Thornton had never understood and could never possess: a happiness founded not on ownership or authority, but on partnership and respect. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in glorious shades of gold and crimson. Hope pointed excitedly at the spectacle, while Hank's arm tightened around Lillian's waist. In that perfect moment, the past receded completely, leaving only the present and the promise of their future together.